Hey everyone, thanks for taking the time to be here, and I appreciate the comments. We're trying something new today with pushing this live on LinkedIn. So I have the comments up over here on the screen, and feel free to jump in with any of your questions or comments right over there. We'll be building from that for our conversation today. So it should be a pretty fun one. We're going to go over the winning strategies for TACFI. So I'm going to go ahead and start diving in. And please feel free to use the comment section. And thanks, Sonia, waving back at you as well. So let's dive in and get rolling. So today we're going to cover winning strategies for TACFI. The Air Force has released the TACFI round, and it is going to be due on November 8th at noon. So what is the purpose of the TACFI program? It is specifically built to help the SBIR Phase 2's transition, and very focused on how are we helping folks transition their technology with the Air Force stakeholders who actually own the problem set that they are working for. And so it's very focused on helping build that transition narrative for an existing Phase 2 project. The unique thing this year is it does not have to be an Air Force Phase 2 for this to go. And yes, we got a question. If this will be recorded, it will be. So what is the difference between the StratFi that was just released and the applications are closed and now the TACFI program? The TACFI program is a smaller dollar amount. So the amounts for TACFI can be between $375,000 to $1.9 million of SBIR, STTR funds. And that is over a 2-year period. And the unique thing is that the matching can be between only private dollars or only government dollars. So when you're looking at the difference between StratFi and TACFI, the big focus is on the amount of funding that there is and the dollar amounts that you can match with. So next up on the slides, we have the matching funds options. We have for TACFI, there's the defense only option, which is $1 SBIR and $1 government. And what this means is for any of the government matching funds that you would get up to $1 in SBIR, STTR funds. This cannot be existing SBIR dollars. This has to be non-SBIR, STTR dollars that the government stakeholder is bringing to the table. So if they have programmed for this money and said, hey, we would like to bring additional funding to the table, if you've done a Phase 3 within the last 6 months and you're submitting, you can use that money as matching funding up to $1.9 million. You cannot mix this money with any of the private matching funds. So if you're doing a dual use where you're bringing private funds to the table for a dual use TACFI, what that means is if you have $1 million of private funding that you've raised, but you also have, say, $900,000 of government funding, you can't mix and match that money together. You have to only do one or the other in this process. So you want to make sure that as you're going through this, you understand where the matching funding is coming from and which program you're applying to. So you might also wonder, well, how do I know if I'm eligible for this process? Well, you need to be still a small business with under 500 people. You need to be on an active SBIR or STTR Phase 2, or one that is completed within 2 years of the capability package submission. And the date for this is calculated from the final deliverable on your Phase 2 contract. You also can't have been awarded a sequential Phase 2, and at least 90 days have to have passed since your first, since the Phase 2 execution. So since that award date began. And the other key thing is if you are a company that already has a StratFi, you can't be submitting for a TACFI here as well. And so the goal for this process is it is a lot more involved than a direct to Phase 2. There's at least 14 different documents you have to put together here. So you might be wondering what the TACFI timeline is. The TACFI timeline for this year, it opened up about 7 days ago on October 4th, and it is due on 8 November. It's due on 8 November at noon. The submission is required to be done by a government stakeholder. The App Ventures team has a lot of challenges with the app sheet submission portal. So you want to make sure that if you can get this in a few days beforehand, that you get your submission done. The submission portal right now has an error where if two people are submitting at the same time or started around the same time and one of them submits first, then you have to restart the entire submission. The submission portal is about 200 questions and it doesn't really save. So you want to make sure that if you're working with your government stakeholders, you can get the submission done a few days earlier, ahead of 8 November. So what are those application requirements? You're going to need to know for your capability package, you need to have your company information, what your phase 2 was about. You need to talk about your reward history. You want to talk about what the phase 2 accomplished and what the outcomes were. And then you want to lay out what the TACFI effort is and what are you trying to do? What are you building for? You don't need a 100-page document here. You need to be clear and concise in that execution of what you're accomplishing for the TACFI. The other things to note is if you're going to do matching funding, for either private government, you need the respective government funding organization list and the government funding letter, or you need your private funding list and the private funding letter. You're going to need to create your spend plan. Your non-proprietary work plan is going to be a part of this. It's a part of your collaboration agreement. You're going to need to create your milestones document, your SBC participation memo saying, yes, we're doing this. And you need a collaboration agreement that is signed by at least an 06 and GS15 for both the end user and the customer. You also need a finance and contracting shop to jump in and say, yes, they're willing to put this effort on contract. So what are the top 10 common mistakes? Often the stakeholders that you're having signed for the finance or the contracting MOUs are going to, those names are different than what you have in the collaboration agreement. You want to make sure that everything is lined up and correct across all of the documents. You want to make sure that you're bringing the right funding to the table and that it is eligible for those times. I'm happy to look over and talk through some of these things in a little deeper if folks are interested in a call. You want to make sure that the type of money you're bringing in based off of the money you have. If you have R&D money for SBIR, then that is attached to an R&D milestone. And if you have operations and maintenance money for your contract as well, you want to make sure that is attached to O&M milestones and not to your R&D milestones. You want to make sure that those are separated and clearly defined. You want to make sure that you have the right signatories. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you need to have that 06 or GS15 to be the signatories for these efforts. You also want to make sure that you have the right phase 2 contract numbers and you have a finance and contracting shop that are jumping in to say, yes, they're willing to do this. And make sure you're using all of the latest templates that are available. There are a couple of version 2 changes for this year's TACFI documents. The other key thing you want to do is make sure you have an operational imperative tie-in. So you're taking your TACFI and you're asking for additional R&D money or there are private funds coming to the table or government funds coming to the table. What is the strategic benefit to the Air Force? What impact are you having to the warfighting mission? Why should the Air Force be investing more dollars into this capability? A big thing that you want to focus on in all of this is helping drive the operational success of the US Air Force. And additional funding is going to help you do that in which ways. So you want to tie all of that together so you can talk about how that ties into the strategic mission and how the work you're doing is also going to help your company transition so that you're going from a prototype capability to one that's integrated into the warfighting effort. Things to think about that are unique for the TACFI. You don't need a program office sponsor, but for the long-term success of what you're doing, you probably want to consider who are those Air Force program offices that you want to work with? Where do you fit in the longer term mission set here? So if you're talking about your transition narrative, even if you don't have signatories from these program offices, you want to make sure you're engaging with them and or the 06 and GS15 leadership that you have signing on this. There's a transition narrative and pathway. This also applies to the Air Force centers, MAGCOMs, and Air Force headquarters staff or Space Force headquarters staff and the Space Force program offices. You want to make sure that you have a tie-in to one of these for the long-term transition narrative. So now you might be wondering, well, how do I win TACFI? What are the things that I should be thinking about? You want to have a deep engagement with your strategic lead for this effort. So because you might not be engaging at a program office level, you want to make sure that the O6 or GS15 that is signing off as the customer and the separate one that is signing off as the end user have a strategic purview over this effort. So they say, yes, they're responsible for the funding that goes in. They own that program element line, or they own that mission set and the budget that comes with it. You want to make sure that they can communicate what is the capability that is being brought to the table. So that's clearly laid out in the defense mission need portion of your collaboration agreement. You want to make sure that the timelines in this spot make sense, so that you have the contracting shop that says, yes, we can execute this within 90 days of selection notification. You want to make sure that you have your funding lined up prior to the time of award, which is a requirement for TACFI and different than the STRATFI process. And that includes your private funding as well. So if you have investment letters, you want to make sure that money can convert and turn over. You want to make sure that as you're talking again about that deep engagement for your Air Force or Space Force stakeholders, they can actively communicate what those trade-off spaces are and how they all, what the long-term impact of bringing your solution to the table is. Tie that back in with the operational imperatives we talked about a few slides ago. And then another key thing is let the data speak for itself. You're executing on a phase 2. That's what makes you eligible for the TACFI program. Show how that prototype project is having an active impact for the warfighter mission today. Show those outcomes. Show it in pictures. Show it in the data that you have. You want to make sure that you're putting together a comprehensive picture here. And as part of that, there's the quad chart requirement for the TACFI. Make sure that that quad chart you're building for your TACFI submission is clear and concise. I would show it to your parents, show it to someone who has never worked in this industry and it's not at your company, and ask them, does this project make sense to you? If I was going up for funding, does this quad chart clearly explain who we are, what we do, what the money is going to get for us, and what the unique innovation is in this process? You need to be able to clearly communicate that. A mistake I've seen for a lot of companies is that quad chart was so company specific. We're all wrapped up in our own companies. This is our world day to day, but this is going to be sent up to the leadership across the Air Force and the Space Force, the senior acquisition authority. So that quad chart needs to be clear and concisely communicated to a senior leader that has never seen this project before, that doesn't know what it is. And you want to make sure that you are communicating that to someone who does not know what this project is, and they feel that if they funded this, there's a positive outcome for the Department of the Air Force. And you want to make sure that you're highlighting what those outcomes are, and you're highlighting what the unique innovation for your company is. So again, let the data speak for itself, but make sure you're clearly communicating in a way that someone that has never been a part of this would clearly understand. The third key strategy for winning your TACFI is about understanding how the money works. We talked a little bit earlier about making sure you're either going just government match or private match. Make sure you're bringing the right types of money to the table. Make sure that money is allocated properly prior to award, and that the funding letters and commitments from the government side or the private side are lined up with the timeline requirements for TACFI, because that money needs to be available at time of award and be able to put on contract. You also want to understand who owns the different budget lines for the space. So these are, similar things that you need for a STRATFI, but on a little bit smaller scale. You still need to understand money and understand where that transition narrative is at. So you might be wondering, well, how did last year's TACFI round go? For last year's TACFI, there were 147 capability packages submitted. Out of the 99 TACFI packages that were eligible, 67 of them were selected and 33 were not. So you want to make sure that as you're going through this process that, like, hey, the TACFI submission rates are not 100%. It's about 68, 69% here. And you want to make sure that you're clearly articulating where you have the funds and where you have the long-term transition narrative. That's going to help you be successful for this upcoming year. The other thing to note is, talk about the average award sizes here in the combo for STRATFI and TACFI. TACFI awards are max at 1.9 million. So if you're going through the private funding match and you have 1.9 million of private funding, but you still have 500K of government funding match, you want to make sure that you're including that in your narrative, because that's talking about how the government stakeholder is going to help transition. And vice versa. If you have a ton of government money for your matching funds, but you still brought private dollars to the table or an advanced purchase order, make sure you talk about that narrative, because the whole goal of this program is to help companies succeed in that transition process. So you might be wondering what the review process is. How do you make, what happens after submission? The TraFi TACFI team has a goal to get these results out in a 90-day period. Last year took over a year plus. I'm hoping that team come together and execute that this year. That'd be fantastic. We're expecting that, hey, if this is a November submission, you're going to hear in the February, March timeline. So what happens is, especially if you're submitting early, there's an advantage to doing that, is this initial review for your package will happen. And if you miss a signature, if you don't have something aligned, if your milestones are incorrect, you'll get that feedback from the ventures team and you can correct it before the final due date. When every of all those packages have completed their initial review after the submission deadline, we'll be moving into functional and strategic review. So there will be specific stakeholders that understand your technology area that will do those functional reviews. And then it's a strategic impact review. Is like, does this make a positive impact for the direction of the Air Force or Space Force? And then there's the board review. And then the applicable would be if the SBA needs to determine if there needs to be a waiver. And then it'll be pushed over to the stakeholders for contract execution. So that's the overall process. It's expected to take about 90 to 120 days. That's what HalfWorks has messaged. So you might be asking, hey, why are we doing this webinar? How have we helped companies? We've helped over 200 companies be successful in this process. Helping win TraFi and TACFI is our sweet spot as a company. Our goal is to help grow the defense industrial base, take companies from 0 to 30 million in government contracts and scale, and make sure that we can create more mid-tier primes in competition. We've won over $367 million for our companies, and we have an 87% success rate on our TraFi and TACFI submissions. We're here to get things done. Outpost is focused on the intersection of technology, capital, and national security. And the TACFI process is a very unique one to help a company grow and scale. So I'll take some time to answer any questions. If folks want to jump into the comment section for LinkedIn, I have it up here on the screen, and I can help answer any questions around the TACFI process. So there is a little bit of a delay between the talk I'm giving and the presentation of LinkedIn. So I think the questions will be coming in here just a moment. So we got a question in of how do I tell the milestones that I have for my TACFI are appropriate use for the different types of dollars that are available. For 3600 money, that's the SBIR, STTR funds. The 3600 money is research and development and test and evaluation funds. So you can use the SBIR, STTR money on milestones where you're doing either further research and development on your product, and or you're also doing test and evaluation. So if you have a product line that you're like, yes, this is interesting, but we need to validate it works in a military context, that's what you can do for the test and evaluation funds. Got another question that came in asking about, hey, what is the max amount of private funding you can bring to the table? You can bring as much private funding as you want to the table to match for the TACFI. The max that the TACFI program will match is 1.9 million. The same goes for the government funding. The max that will be matched is 1.9 million, and you have a 2-year period of performance. Another question that came in was, can you mix and match the funding? No, you cannot mix and match the funding that is coming. All right, if we have any more questions, please feel free to type them in the comments channel and we'll build from there. All right, folks, I'll stay on for a few more minutes and happy to answer any questions that come through for the TACFI process. Oh, there's one. I was asking like, who are the signatories and that are required? Again, a reminder, it's a 06, so a kernel, or a GS15 that has strategic purview over the mission set. So if you have an Air Force stakeholder that says, yes, we own the budget, own this mission set, that's where you want to make sure you're focusing your, that's who needs to sign your collaboration agreement. Do you need to have a specific government person that has to do the submission? No, it could be any government individual. It has to be a government, it can't be a contractor. If they have to be the one submitting the package, and you can, what best practice is there's 200 questions on the submission portal, build an Excel spreadsheet of all those questions and help that government stakeholder copy and paste those over for submission. Okay, thanks everyone for your time. I'll be here for a couple more minutes, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at joey@theoutpost.com. My number is on there as well. Happy to set up a follow-up call and help anybody with the TACFI submission process. Hope everyone's doing well and good luck. We got under a month left.